billionaire's deal was collapsing in a language no one understood, until a maid's daughter walked in and changed everything. The millionaire's voice cut through the hotel lobby. "Does anyone here speak Mandarin?" His tone was sharp, the manager's face pale. Staff exchanged panicked glances, shrinking back. The high-profile guest waited, tapping his watch. By the laundry carts, a 10-year-old girl quietly stacked folded linens. Blonde hair tied back, plain uniform too big for her frame. She didn't look up. "Anyone?" The manager barked again, desperate now. A few guests turned to watch. Clara finally set down the towels, walked forward without hurry. "I can," she said softly. The room stilled. The manager frowned, already waving her off. "This isn't a game, kid." But when she turned to the millionaire and spoke, in flawless Mandarin, the air shifted, and every person within earshot knew they had just underestimated the wrong girl. Just a quick little pause before I forget. If you like this kind of stories of overcoming adversity and justice, please leave a like and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to our channel so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. I guarantee you won't want to miss it. Now let's jump back in. The marble floors of the Aurora International Hotel gleamed like still water. Guests crossed the lobby without looking down, their eyes fixed on chandeliers or flight itineraries, never noticing the small figure at the far end with the mop. Clara Wynne, 10 years old, blonde hair tied in a plain braid, moved like she had all the time in the world. She didn't. The morning rush had come early, and the lobby cafe's milk frother had already exploded in a frothy tantrum on the floor. Still, she swirled the mop in quiet arcs, rinsed it in the bucket, and wrung it out without a splash. Her shoes were a half-size too big, hand-me-downs from a guest who never claimed their luggage. Her shirt, white cotton, neatly tucked into dark slacks, was a size too small but ironed flat. No name tag. Staff didn't wear them unless they were on the payroll. She wasn't. A bellboy in a crimson waistcoat nearly tripped over her bucket, muttered something under his breath, and hurried off without waiting for an apology. Clara didn't look up. She had learned the rhythm of moving in plain sight while staying invisible. The air smelled faintly of coffee beans and expensive perfume. At the front desk, manager Elliot Harridge, a tall man with immaculate hair and a navy suit pressed to knife-edge precision, greeted a woman with luggage worth more than the Wynne family's annual rent. Clara caught the glance he sent her way, a glance that didn't settle long enough to be called seeing. A cart of clean towels waited by the elevator. Her mother, Marion Wynne, the head housemaid, had asked her to deliver them to the 10th floor while she finished prepping the penthouse suite. Clara would do it, but for now she was assigned to the floor, moving behind a potted palm to scrub a coffee stain that had been ground into the carpet by a guest's impatient heel. The chandelier above cast fractured light on her braid, catching in strands the color of wheat in summer. No one noticed. From the revolving door came a burst of humid air, August heat rushing in, along with a pair of men in dark suits escorting a distinguished older man with silver hair and a silk scarf. He had the self-contained stillness of someone used to people making space for him without asking. Clara's mop paused in mid-arc. She had seen that posture before, but not here, not in this country. The older man's eyes swept the lobby once, passing over her like she was part of the furniture. Elliot straightened at the desk, his professional smile sharpening. Somewhere in the elevator shaft, a low hum vibrated through the marble. Clara returned to her work, her hands steady. But her ears were already tuned to the cadence of the man's voice as he spoke quietly to his escorts. It wasn't English. Not yet important, at least not to anyone else in the lobby. But Clara heard it, and she understood every word. By late morning, the lobby had thinned out. The early flights had gone, and the tourist buses wouldn't arrive until noon. Clara took the towel cart toward the service elevator, pushing it with one hand while balancing a tray of room service cutlery in the other. The hum of the elevator motor was steady, a background song she'd grown up with. Every floor in the Aurora had its own scent. The 5th smelled faintly of lilies from the florist's deliveries, the 10th of polished walnut and floor wax. Clara could map them blindfolded. On the 3rd floor landing, Pauline, one of the junior housemaids, leaned against her cart, scrolling through her phone. "Morning, kid," Pauline said without looking up. "Morning," Clara replied. She shifted the tray to her hip so she could slide past. "You missed a spot back by the cafe," Pauline added absently. Clara nodded. She hadn't missed it. She'd left it for later, when the floor would be empty and she could work without weaving between guests. But she didn't explain. She rarely did. Down the hall, she stopped at room 310, knocked twice, and waited. A muffled "come in" answered. Inside, a businessman was hunched over his laptop, tie loosened. He didn't glance up when she set the clean cutlery on the desk. "Thanks," he muttered. She smiled faintly, a reflex, and backed out. This was how her days went. No one was cruel. No one was warm. She existed in the polite no-man's land between seen and unseen, the daughter of a maid who'd been working at the Aurora since Clara was born. She'd spent more hours here than in any playground. By the time she reached the 10th floor, the towel cart wheels squeaked faintly, a sound the guests wouldn't hear, but she did. She pressed her palm against the metal axle as if to quiet it. At Suite 1002, her mother met her at the door, hair pinned tight, uniform crisp. "You're late," Marion said, though her voice was soft. "Sorry." Elevator was slow. Her mother studied her for half a heartbeat. "Lunch is in an hour. I put your book in the locker." Clara nodded. That meant she'd remembered the worn paperback Clara was reading. Not a children's book, but a collection of translated poetry her mother had rescued from a guest's abandoned pile. She turned back toward the elevator. In the hallway mirror, she caught her own reflection, braid tidy, chin level, eyes calm. From the lobby far below, faintly through the shaft, she heard that same man's voice again. She didn't look surprised. She only pressed the elevator button and waited, listening. The elevator doors opened to the lobby with a muted chime. The air felt heavier here, not hot, but charged, like the moment before rain. The silver-haired man was standing near the concierge desk now, his scarf draped over one arm, his expression tightening as manager Elliot Harridge tried, and failed, to respond to something he'd said. Elliot's polite smile was cracking at the edges. His voice stayed warm, but the words were fumbling, wrong cadence, wrong tones. The man's brows drew together. He repeated himself, slower this time, each syllable deliberate. Clara, still half hidden behind the towel cart, froze mid-step. She knew those words. Not just their meaning, but their texture, the slight northern lilt, the softness at the end of each phrase. She had grown up hearing it from one man only, her grandfather, in a kitchen smelling of steamed dumplings and black tea. Elliot tried again. It was no better. The older man sighed, clearly searching for patience. His escorts shifted uneasily. A couple at the cafe glanced over, curious. A busboy, hurrying past with an empty tray, bumped into Clara's cart. The top towel slid and fell. Without thinking, Clara caught it in one hand and said softly, in the same language the man had used. "He says he's looking for someone who speaks Mandarin." The busboy blinked at her. "What?" Clara realized too late that she'd spoken out loud. She shrugged, refolded the towel, and pretended to fuss with the cart's wheel. But the sound had carried farther than she meant. One of the man's escorts, tall, with square glasses, turned sharply toward her. His expression didn't change, but his eyes locked onto her like a camera lens focusing. Clara kept her gaze on the cart, her braid falling forward to shield her face. Elliot followed the escort's glance, his own brows lifting a fraction when he realized who they were looking at. A girl, a maid's daughter, barely up to the concierge desk in height. The older man himself hadn't moved, but there was now a pause in the air, the kind that draws in every stray whisper. Clara pushed the cart forward, her step steady. She didn't hurry, but she didn't linger either. She knew enough to move before anyone asked questions. Still, as the service door swung shut behind her, she caught the faintest sound, the older man speaking again, quieter this time, in that same rolling Mandarin. "Is it her?" She didn't answer. The service hallway was narrow, lined with beige walls and low humming vents. Clara pushed the towel cart toward the laundry room, letting the door swing shut behind her. She didn't look back, but she knew. Someone had followed her with their eyes. Not in the usual way, not the casual glance that came with being in the background, but with the steady precision of someone sighting along the barrel of a rifle. She stacked the towels into neat, squared piles on the counter. Marion's voice drifted in from the adjoining room, discussing room assignments with the laundry supervisor. Clara worked quietly, each fold exact, her hands finding their rhythm. Through the half-open laundry room door, she caught sight of the lobby beyond, or rather, of him. The man in square glasses. one of the silver-haired guests' escorts. He stood just inside the lobby, pretending to look over a map on the wall. His head didn't move much, but his eyes, they were scanning, measuring. When another housemaid wheeled a vacuum past, he shifted his stance just enough to keep the service hallway in his peripheral vision. Clara kept folding. She didn't break the rhythm. Moments later, Manager Elliot came striding through, speaking in his polished, clipped tone to a bellboy. His eyes brushed over the laundry room, but he didn't stop. He was keeping the day moving, and yet his glance lingered half a beat too long on Clara before snapping back to his conversation. It was enough. Two people had noticed her where they shouldn't have. That never happened. Her mother entered, brushing a loose strand of hair back into place. "Towel's done." "Almost," Clara said. Marion's eyes flicked to the hallway beyond. "Stay out of sight for a bit. Lobby's crowded." Clara nodded. But inside, the thought had already rooted. Crowded or not, someone had seen her. Really seen her. In the lobby, the silver-haired man was seated now, a cup of tea before him, untouched. His posture was still and formal, but his gaze kept returning to the service hallway door, not impatient, not curious, but watchful. Clara gathered the last of the towels. She didn't know yet what he wanted, but she knew this much. Once a man like that had seen you, you couldn't go back to being invisible. The laundry room door creaked open. Clara didn't turn. She was aligning the corners of a fresh stack of bath sheets, making sure each fold was perfectly squared. The air was warm here, thick with the clean, heavy scent of detergent and steam. It wasn't her mother who stepped in. The man with square glasses filled the doorway, tall, posture sharp but not rigid, his suit jacket the sort of tailored fit that moved like it belonged to him. The silver frames caught a flicker of light from the overhead bulbs. He didn't speak right away. Clara set the folded towel down, her hands slow, deliberate. She'd learned long ago that quick movements drew more attention than stillness. "Busy morning," he said finally. The tone was conversational, but the air between them stayed still. She gave a small nod. "Always is." He stepped inside, 2 quiet paces, enough to be in the room but not enough to block the exit. His shoes were polished, soles whispering against the tile. "You work here?" Clara didn't look up from the pile. "Just helping my mom." He let that hang for a beat, as if weighing whether helping meant what it sounded like. "You speak Mandarin?" The words came lightly, as though it were an afterthought, but it wasn't. There was a precision to his phrasing, a little too careful for casual interest. Clara's fingers pressed the edges of the towel flat. "I understand some." "Some," he repeated quietly. "Where did you learn?" She lifted her eyes to his briefly, pale blue meeting a darker, calculating gaze. "Family." He seemed to wait for more. She offered none. The hum of the industrial dryer in the corner filled the silence. A button inside the drum clicked faintly against the metal with each turn. He moved another half-step forward, close enough now that she could see the faintest crease at the edge of his cuff, where the fabric met his wrist. "Our guest downstairs, he's an important man. He's not used to being misunderstood." Clara's voice stayed even. Then he should find someone who understands him. For just a moment, the line of his jaw tightened. Not anger, more like interest sharpening. "You're young to understand that much," he said. "I'm young for a lot of things." The faintest flicker of a smile, or maybe just the thought of one, crossed his face. Then he glanced toward the hall. "Manager Harridge may want to speak with you," he said, stepping back toward the door. "Don't go far." He left without waiting for a reply. Clara resumed folding, as if nothing had happened, but her mind was already cataloging details. The way he studied her hands, the pause before each question, the fact that he hadn't asked her name. Through the narrow view of the half-open door, she saw Elliot at the far end of the hallway, straightening his tie, looking her way. Something was about to change. Elliot Harridge didn't like to linger in service corridors. His shoes, black, mirror-shined, clicked softly as he entered the laundry room, his tailored navy suit cutting a sharp line against the beige walls. "Clara Wynne," he said, his voice calm but clipped, like someone reading a name off a ledger. "Come with me." He didn't ask if she was busy. He didn't explain. Clara set aside the towel in her hands, smoothing the fold before placing it on the stack. Her mother's voice floated in from the adjoining room. "Clara? What is it?" But Elliot answered for her. "I'll bring her right back, Marion." Marion appeared in the doorway, brows knitting, but said nothing. She knew the hotel's hierarchy well enough to read Elliot's tone. Clara followed him into the hallway, her steps matching his brisk pace. She noticed the man with square glasses leaning against the far wall now, arms loosely crossed, his eyes following them without a word. The lobby smelled different than it had earlier, more perfume now, mingled with the faint spice of the tea set laid out near the silver-haired guest. A string quartet's recording played softly over the speakers, replacing the bright piano music from the morning rush. They passed the concierge desk, where two guests turned to watch, curiosity flickering in their expressions. Clara didn't look at them. Elliot led her toward the private elevator. The polished brass doors reflected them in distorted gold. His tall figure, her smaller one in plain black slacks and white shirt, braid neat, face composed. He swiped a key card, and the doors opened onto a small lift with walnut paneling and a faint scent of lemon polish. The hum inside was different from the service elevator, smoother, quieter, as if it belonged to another building entirely. The ride up was silent. When the doors opened, the hallway beyond was nothing like the muted beiges downstairs. Here, the carpet was deep blue with a silver thread winding through it like a river. The walls were paneled in rich wood, hung with framed oil paintings of landscapes, mountains fading into mist, rivers bending around stone villages. The light was softer here, the air cooler. Clara's shoes sank slightly into the carpet. Elliot led her toward a pair of double doors at the end of the hall. Two hotel staff in tailored vests stood on either side. They stepped aside as the doors opened. Inside, the space was a study in restrained opulence. High ceilings, tall windows overlooking the city, heavy drapes gathered with braided cords. A table set for tea stood near the center, and at it sat the silver-haired man. He looked at her directly this time. No smile, no frown, just steady appraisal. Elliot gestured toward a chair opposite him. Please, have a seat. The chair was heavier than it looked, its carved arms cool beneath Clara's palms. She sat straight, feet flat on the deep blue rug, her braid resting neatly over her shoulder. The silver-haired man studied her without haste. Up close, she could see the fine lines etched at the corners of his eyes, not from smiling, but from years of watching people. Your name? He asked. His voice was quiet, but carried the weight of someone accustomed to being answered. Clara Wynne, she said. His gaze flicked toward Elliot, who gave a slight nod, as though confirming something. You understood me downstairs, the man said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Clara replied. Where did you learn? Clara hesitated, her eyes drawn for a moment to the window behind him. The city stretched out in the afternoon light, the rooftops washed in gold. From somewhere in her memory came the clink of porcelain cups in her grandfather's kitchen, the steam rising from black tea poured into mismatched mugs. He'd spoken to her in the same language the silver-haired man used now, never translating, never slowing down, as though certain she would understand. My grandfather, she said simply. The man leaned back slightly in his chair. And your grandfather? Where is he now? Clara's gaze stayed steady, but her hands closed lightly over the carved armrests. He's gone. The man nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but she sensed it wasn't pity, more like acknowledgement. Elliot poured tea from a porcelain pot into 2 cups, setting one in front of her. She thanked him quietly. Clara had been 5 when her grandfather's health began to fail. Marion had taken double shifts at the hotel to cover the hospital bills, and Clara had spent afternoons reading aloud to him from old books, some in English, some in the language he had carried from his own country. By the time he passed, she'd spoken it more fluently than many adults. But she had learned early not to display it. People didn't expect it from her, and when they did find out, their reactions were unpredictable, sometimes impressed, sometimes suspicious, sometimes other things. The silver-haired man sipped his tea, then set the cup down with precise care. Not many here would have understood what I said today, he remarked. Even fewer could have answered without hesitation. Clara didn't reply. The tea was delicate, slightly floral, and she let the warmth settle in her hands. Elliot cleared his throat. Mr. Leong has asked to speak with you privately, Clara. She looked from Elliot to the man across from her. The late sunlight caught in the folds of his silk scarf, and in that moment, she knew this was not a casual meeting. Mr. Leong didn't rush. He leaned back, fingertips resting lightly on the edge of the table, as though he could wait all afternoon for an answer that mattered. "You've lived here long?" he asked. "All my life," Clara replied. "Your mother, she works here too?" Clara nodded. "Head housemaid. She started before I was born." There was no pride in her tone, but no shame either. Just truth. Mr. Liang took a slow sip of tea. "And your father?" She didn't flinch. "He left when I was 4. The silence afterward was not heavy, just deliberate. The carpet beneath her shoes felt thick, almost cushioning the words she didn't say. That her father's departure had not been sudden, but a long, quiet fading. Fewer visits, shorter phone calls, then none at all. She'd stopped asking questions after the first year. Mr. Liang's eyes stayed on her, not prying but steady, as if measuring the weight of her answers. Clara took a sip of tea. "It's just been me and Mom since then." "And your grandfather," Mr. Liang added. She nodded. "He taught me the language. Said it was a piece of my family I shouldn't lose." In her mind, she could still see him at the kitchen table, leaning forward with the patience of a man who had weathered long winters and harder years. He'd made her recite poems she didn't understand at first, then taught her their meanings one line at a time. When he got sick, the lessons didn't stop. They just moved to the hospital room. She remembered balancing her school books on the edge of his bed, reading to him over the rhythmic beep of machines. She had been 7 when he pressed his old leather-bound notebook into her hands, the one filled with his own handwriting in that flowing script. Mr. Liang's gaze shifted briefly to her hands. "Do you still study?" Clara set her cup down. "Every day. Even now? With school, with everything else?" "Yes." Her answer was simple. "If you stop practicing, you forget." Elliot, who had been standing quietly at her side, glanced at her with a flicker of surprise, as though he'd just realized she wasn't being modest. She meant every word. Mr. Liang leaned forward slightly. "And why did you speak up today?" Clara thought for a moment. "Because no one else understood you." There was no bravado in her voice, just the straightforward logic of a girl who had been taught to act when something needed doing. Mr. Liang's expression didn't change, but there was a subtle shift in the air between them, as if something had quietly moved into place. Mr. Liang set his teacup down with the careful grace of someone who valued precision. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and drew out a thin leather portfolio. He unfastened it, revealing a single sheet of heavy cream-colored paper filled from top to bottom in neat, handwritten lines. The ink shimmered faintly under the soft light. He slid it across the table toward Clara. "Tell me what this says." Her fingers hovered above the page for a moment before she touched it. The handwriting was tight, deliberate, each character drawn with a scholar's hand. She recognized the style. Her grandfather had used something similar in his own notes. The room had grown quieter. Elliot shifted subtly to one side, hands clasped behind his back, as though positioning himself to observe both her and Mr. Liang at once. Clara read the first few lines silently. It wasn't casual conversation. It was a letter, personal but formal. The kind of thing you might send to an elder you respected deeply. The words formed easily in her mind, but she didn't rush. Her grandfather had always told her, if you translate too fast, you serve yourself. If you take your time, you serve the listener. Finally, she spoke, in English, giving the meaning without breaking the tone. "To my esteemed friend, it has been many years since our last meeting, but my thoughts remain with you in both times of joy and difficulty." She continued, line by line, her voice steady, letting the pauses in the original find their echo in the translation. She didn't glance up, didn't seek a reaction. By the time she reached the final lines, a quiet blessing for health and peace, she set the paper down and folded her hands in her lap. Mr. Liang regarded her for a long moment. "You left nothing out?" "No," Clara said. "And I didn't add anything either." The faintest shadow of a smile touched his mouth. "Good." He turned to Elliot. "She listens before she speaks. That is rare." Elliot inclined his head, though his eyes remained on Clara, as if recalibrating something he thought he knew. Mr. Liang took back the paper and returned it to the portfolio. "There is someone downstairs," he said, "who has been waiting to discuss an urgent matter. His Mandarin is clear, but his patience is not." He stood, the motion unhurried. "Come with me. You will help him understand, and help me understand him." Clara rose. She felt the weight of both men's attention, but her expression stayed composed. She had carried heavier weights in smaller rooms. The private elevator slid open to the lobby again. Afternoon light spilled through the tall glass doors, catching on polished brass rails and the silverware set neatly in the cafe. At the far end of the room, a man in his 40s stood near the concierge desk, his suit slightly rumpled, his watchband worn. His expression was tight. His voice clipped as he spoke in Mandarin to one of Mr. Liang's escorts. The escort nodded along, but it was clear from his posture, shoulders inching higher, chin dipping lower, that the conversation was straining at the edges. Mr. Liang walked toward him, Clara a half-step behind. Elliot followed at a polite distance, the rhythm of his stride just slow enough to listen without appearing to hover. When the man noticed Mr. Liang, his tone shifted, respectful, but urgent. Clara listened, the words falling into place in her mind like beads on a string. She waited until there was a natural pause, then spoke in English for Mr. Liang. He says the shipment was delayed at the port, and the documents were sent without the proper seals. Customs is holding everything. Mr. Liang replied in Mandarin, his voice low and even. Clara mirrored the tone in English. He wants you to speak directly with the port authority. He believes the matter can be resolved today if they understand the urgency. The man's eyes softened just slightly at her translation, the tension in his jaw loosening. He continued, speaking faster now. Clara matched him, keeping her English clear and exact. Around them, a small pocket of stillness formed. The receptionist's typing slowed. A couple of guests seated in the lounge began to glance over, curiosity tugging at their attention. Even the bellboy paused mid-step, his hand resting on the handle of a luggage cart. It wasn't the words that drew them. Most couldn't follow either language fully, but the ease with which she moved between them. No hesitation, no searching for phrases. Mr. Liang never looked at her while she spoke. He kept his eyes on the man, but his posture eased fractionally, as though the conversation had found the proper footing it had lacked earlier. When it ended, the man gave a small bow of thanks, first to Mr. Liang, then, after a beat's consideration, to Clara. She inclined her head in return. Mr. Liang gestured toward the cafe seating. "We will speak further upstairs," he told Elliot. "Give us 10 minutes." As they turned back toward the private elevator, Clara caught the faint murmur of two guests behind her. "That's the maid's girl." And the way the tone shifted halfway through the sentence, from idle dismissal to something closer to wonder. The elevator hummed softly as it carried them back up. Clara stood at an angle, hands loosely clasped in front of her, eyes fixed on the brushed metal doors. She could feel Elliot watching her in the reflection, not with suspicion now, but with a quiet sort of recalculation. When they stepped out onto the executive floor, the air felt subtly different, cooler, more controlled. The carpet here muted every footstep, but already, the ripples had begun. A woman in a pencil skirt and headset walked past, her pace quick. She gave a polite nod to Mr. Liang, then a glance at Clara that lingered a second too long. By the time she reached the end of the hall, she was leaning toward a colleague, lips moving in the hushed cadence of someone passing along fresh news. In the small reception area outside Mr. Liang's office, two staff members were bent over a clipboard. Their conversation stopped as the trio entered. One of them, a tall man with a pressed vest, shifted his weight, glanced at Clara, then away. The kind of glance that wasn't really about looking, but about seeing differently. Inside, while Mr. Liang settled into his desk chair, Elliot lingered in the doorway. Down the hall, Clara caught a sound, a half-laugh, half-question, in the rhythm of someone telling a story they weren't sure they believed. She just started speaking, like it was nothing. Couldn't have been her first time, but she's just the maid's. It was like hearing her name from another room when she was a child, that reflexive tightening of the spine, the urge to listen without showing it. Mr. Liang slid a document across the desk toward Elliot, then turned to Clara. "You worked at this pace before?" "Yes," she said. "Under pressure?" "Yes." He didn't press further. Instead, he reached for a pen and made a small note in the margin of a ledger, as if her answers simply confirmed something he'd already decided. Downstairs, the whisper network kept moving. A bellboy repeated the scene to a bartender, who repeated it to a guest. By the time it circled back up to the concierge desk, the edges of the story had sharpened. The translation was now described as flawless, immediate, and, in some versions, impossible for a child her age. Clara knew enough to leave it alone. Stories grew best without interference. The office smelled faintly of cedar and ink, a clean, precise scent, the kind that felt as if it had been curated as carefully as the rest of the space. The curtains were drawn halfway, softening the city's glare into a muted silver wash across the room. Mr. Liang set his pen down parallel to the edge of the desk, then folded his hands. His eyes didn't wander. They stayed fixed on Clara with a level, patient interest. "You know this hotel is more than its rooms," he said. "It's a meeting place. Deals are made here every day that shape businesses, sometimes entire markets. And language," he let the pause breathe. "Language makes those deals possible." Clara kept her posture still, her hands resting in her lap. "Yes, sir. You've shown me you can bridge a gap most people here couldn't even step across." Quickly, calmly. "It was just a translation," she said. His mouth curved, but not into a smile. "It was a bridge at the right moment. That's worth more than people realize." He leaned back slightly. "I'd like you to work directly with our executive team. Liaison duties. Discreet, precise. You'd have access to meetings, calls, visiting dignitaries. Not as a curiosity, as a member of the staff." Her eyes dropped for a second to the grain of the desk. "Because I'm the only one here who speaks Mandarin? In part. But also because you didn't make it about yourself." She let that sit. The hum of the city outside filled the space between them. "If I say yes," she asked, "am I here to be useful? Or to be displayed?" That earned a small, approving nod. "If you ever feel it's the latter, you'll tell me. And if I don't listen, you'll walk away." Agreed. Clara studied him for a moment, not searching for dishonesty, but weighing the kind of man who'd put those terms out plainly. Finally, she said, "Agreed." Mr. Liang opened the desk drawer, withdrew a slim black folder, and slid it toward her. "Read this tonight. We'll begin tomorrow." She took it without looking inside, tucking it under her arm. Elliot, who had been silent by the wall, finally spoke. "That's a fast decision." "Some decisions," Mr. Liang said, "are easier when you see what you need." Clara didn't answer. She just inclined her head slightly, the way her mother had taught her, acknowledgement without surrender. The morning air was sharp, carrying that faint mineral scent the city only held in its first quiet hours. Clara stepped off the bus 2 blocks from the hotel, the same stop she'd taken dozens of times before. But today she didn't head for the service entrance. Her shoes clicked lightly on the marble as she walked through the front lobby, past the concierge desk, beneath the chandelier's warm scatter of light. The doorman, who usually greeted her mother with a polite but distracted nod, actually paused mid-sentence to watch her pass. She wore a simple navy dress with a narrow belt and low heels, not elaborate, but deliberate. Her blonde hair was tied back neatly, not a strand loose. In one hand, she carried the black folder Mr. Liang had given her. The executive floor was hushed in a different way from the service corridors. It was a quiet that expected things to happen behind closed doors, a quiet that didn't invite lingering. The receptionist glanced up, hesitated, then offered a measured smile. "Good morning. Clara, right?" "Yes." "They're in conference, too." Inside, the meeting room was already filling. Long table, water glasses, thin laptops glowing faintly. Several men in dark suits glanced her way, not with warmth, not with hostility, just curiosity sharpened by context. A woman in a tailored gray jacket stood near the far end, speaking to Elliot in a low voice. Clara moved to an empty chair near the middle of the table, setting the folder down in front of her. She didn't fidget, didn't try to start a conversation. When the meeting began, she kept her gaze steady, scanning the documents in front of her without drawing attention. At first, no one addressed her directly. Then, halfway through, a visiting delegate leaned forward, speaking rapidly in Mandarin, a question about scheduling. Before anyone else could react, Clara answered, her tone even, pacing her words to match his rhythm. She didn't look around to see the reaction. She just returned to the notes once he nodded in thanks. Across the table, a man in a charcoal suit leaned toward his neighbor. The whisper was almost inaudible, but Clara caught it. So it's true. By the end of the hour, she had spoken twice more, each time with the same calm precision. And though no one made a show of it, their body language shifted, shoulders angling toward her when she spoke, glances flicked her way during pauses. When they stood to leave, the woman in gray offered her a faint smile. "Welcome aboard." It wasn't warm exactly, but but it wasn't indifferent either. It was supposed to be a routine follow-up. The mid-morning meeting had a set agenda: finalize contract terms with the visiting investors, confirm timelines, and wrap by lunch. But the moment the call connected to the overseas conference room, the temperature in the executive suite seemed to drop. On the screen, three men in tailored suits leaned toward their microphones, speaking in Mandarin, not angry, but rapid, clipped, and with an undertone that needed no translation. Something had gone wrong. Mr. Liang's face remained composed, but his knuckles rested firmly against the table. Elliot, seated just behind him, began flipping through a thick folder, looking for something, anything, that might explain the shift in tone. No one else at the table understood a word. The man on the left leaned forward again, speaking faster now. Clara, seated mid-table, recognized the words as a pointed objection: shipment delays, cost overages, and a hint that they might be considering another supplier. She waited until the speaker paused, then looked directly at Mr. Liang. They think the schedule change means we can't deliver at all. His eyes flicked to her. Then tell them we can, and why. The room went still. Even the clicking laptop keys stopped. Clara leaned slightly toward the microphone. Her voice was calm, deliberate, each sentence shaped with the precision of someone who had been taught never to rush clarity. She explained the real reason for the change, the measures taken to prevent further delay, and the additional quality assurance they were offering. She made it sound not like an excuse, but a reassurance, a promise given by someone who knew it would be kept. When she finished, the three men conferred quietly among themselves. For a long moment, the only sound in the conference room was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then the lead negotiator spoke again, slower now. He acknowledged her points, agreed to maintain the current terms, and suggested a joint inspection at the next milestone. Mr. Liang nodded once. We'll prepare for it. The call ended. Clara sat back, closing her folder. She didn't look around to see the faces, but she felt the air shift, the guarded skepticism in the room replaced by something heavier, more deliberate. Elliot finally broke it. Guess we don't need an interpreter on standby after all. Mr. Liang didn't smile, but he said, we still do. We just already have one. The week moved on without ceremony. Clara kept to her work, double-checking guest confirmations, filing translation notes from the Liang meeting, quietly patching small problems before they could turn into big ones. No one said much about that tense negotiation. Not directly, but the way certain people glanced her way in the break room felt different. Not warmer, exactly, but measured, as if they were reassessing, filing her away in a different category than before. On Thursday morning, Elliot appeared in the staff lounge doorway while she was pouring coffee. You're wanted upstairs, he said. For? She asked, her tone more puzzled than wary. You'll see. He didn't elaborate, just turned and started walking. She followed, still holding the paper cup, steam curling into the cool air of the executive floor hallway. The double glass doors to the main conference room were open. The long polished tables sat empty, but a small group stood near the far wall, a wall that looked different. The section where a generic landscape painting had hung was now empty except for a single frame, freshly mounted. Mr. Liang was standing there, speaking in low tones to the head of HR. When he noticed Clara, he stepped aside. The plaque caught the light, brushed metal, gold lettering. Liaison and Cultural Coordinator. Clara Walsh. No flourish, no excessive decoration. Just her name, the title, and the hotel crest below. She stared at it, unsure how to respond. I was just filling in, she said quietly. Mr. Liang's reply was matter-of-fact. Filling in doesn't turn a collapsing deal into a continued partnership. From behind her, a few voices murmured quiet congratulations. One of the housekeeping supervisors she'd known since she was 9 smiled faintly. Elliot gave a single, approving nod, the kind men give when words aren't required. Clara reached out, letting her fingers touch the edge of the frame, not in ownership, but in acknowledgement. The metal felt cool under her skin, solid, real. The moment didn't linger. Someone from the kitchen staff needed to speak with Mr. Liang. The HR head was called away. Within minutes, the room was empty again except for Clara and the plaque. She stood there a moment longer, sipping her coffee, looking at the neat lettering. It wasn't applause. It wasn't a speech. But it was permanent. The plaque went up quietly, but its shadow stretched further than Clara expected. It started the next morning in the service corridor. She was heading to the storage closet for some translation materials when Rosa, the laundry supervisor, stepped out of a side door holding a small envelope. "This was in the break room, for you," Rosa said, her voice low. Inside was a folded scrap of stationery from the housekeeping desk. The handwriting was looping and careful, for making sure we're seen, even when we're not in the room. D. No signature beyond the initial. But Clara recognized the D, Diego, the night porter. Later, in the freight elevator, an older maintenance worker she barely knew gave her a slight nod. "Good work, Miss Walsh," he said. No smile, no further explanation. Just that. By midweek, the acknowledgments came in fragments. In the staff cafeteria, one of the kitchen assistants slid an extra croissant onto her tray without a word. A bellhop she'd seen 100 times, but never spoken to tipped his cap when passing her in the hall. A front desk clerk, normally all business, quietly asked if she could look over a letter from a Chinese guest, just to make sure I'm not missing anything. It wasn't flattery. It wasn't people trying to get something from her. These were small tokens, private ones, as if the hotel's undercurrent had shifted just a fraction in her direction. One afternoon, as she passed through the lobby on her way to the staff exit, Mrs. Baird, a longtime guest with snow-white hair and a designer scarf, intercepted her. "You're Clara, aren't you?" the woman asked. "Yes, ma'am. I hear you made quite an impression the other day. My late husband used to say the real power in any place is with the people no one notices." She leaned in slightly. He was right. Clara just nodded, unsure how to answer. By the end of the week, she found herself back in the copy room where Elliot had first found her. On the counter sat a single lily in a glass of water, with a sticky note that read, "For the quiet ones who change everything." She didn't know who left it. She didn't ask. Instead, she set the flower beside her bag and continued stacking reports, the faint scent of the lily drifting through the hum of the machine. Recognition didn't need to be loud. Sometimes it was enough to feel the shift in the air, a ripple of acknowledgement from those who had never been invited to the table but knew when someone had pulled back a chair. It happened late on a Friday afternoon, just as the lobby was beginning to fill with the hum of weekend arrivals. Clara was reviewing the evening schedule at the concierge desk when she felt the shift, that subtle tightening in the air that often preceded trouble. A tall man in an immaculate navy suit strode across the marble floor, his polished shoes tapping like a metronome. He didn't glance at the bell staff, didn't acknowledge the receptionist's polite greeting. His eyes were fixed on Clara. "Miss Walsh." His voice was clipped, every syllable sharpened. "Yes. I'm Richard Hale, Board of Directors." She'd heard the name before, a shareholder, influential, the kind who spoke more to numbers than to people. "I've been told," he said, lowering his voice slightly but not enough for the surrounding staff to miss, "that you've been given certain responsibilities outside your original position." "That's correct." He stepped closer, the faint scent of expensive cologne and impatience in the air. "I need to understand why a maid's daughter," the pause was deliberate, "is suddenly involved in high-level negotiations with our most valuable clients." Several nearby employees froze mid-task, their eyes flicking toward the scene without moving their heads. Clara met his gaze. "Because I speak the language they speak, sir." "That can be hired," he said flatly. "What can't be hired is the kind of understanding it takes to represent this establishment at that level. That takes years. Credentials. Proven judgment." Her reply was calm. "Even Mr. Liang and the Liang's legal team believed I had enough of all three to keep the agreement intact. That was one deal. One deal that was about to collapse," she said. And didn't. For a moment, the two of them held eye contact, the quiet around them thickening. Richard's jaw worked once, like he was biting back his next sentence. "We'll see if that luck holds," he said finally, turning on his heel and heading toward the elevators without a goodbye. The receptionist let out a breath she'd clearly been holding. A bellhop glanced at Clara, then looked away quickly. Clara picked up her notepad and pen, sliding them into the desk drawer. Her pulse had stayed steady, a discipline learned long before this place. She didn't need to win the man over today. She just needed to keep the work standing. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Elliot leaning on the far column, arms crossed. He gave her a slow, deliberate nod, the kind that said, "You handled that right." It happened the very next day. The Liang's legal liaison had returned unexpectedly, this time with two additional executives in tow. Their arrival caused a quiet stir. High-value guests meant high-stakes negotiations, and the hotel's reputation was part of the bargaining table. Clara was in the back office, going over translation notes, when Elliot appeared in the doorway. His tone was brisk, but his eyes carried weight. "They're here. And there's a problem. Richard's already in the room." The conference room on the top floor was all glass walls and quiet tension. Richard Hale sat at the head of the polished table, a fixed corporate smile on his face. Across from him, the visitors conferred rapidly in Mandarin, their voices low but urgent. Clara recognized the tone. Something was wrong, and they were speaking faster than Richard could follow. He glanced at her as she entered, the flicker of annoyance unmistakable. "Miss Walsh," he said, without moving from his chair. "This is an internal matter." The lead executive from the visiting party looked up sharply when he saw her. "You speak our language," he said, "in their language." Clara answered in kind, her tone even, professional. The shift in the room was immediate. The executive's postures eased slightly. She moved closer, listening intently as they outlined their concern. A contract clause that, in its current English form, would shift liability entirely to their side. "They believe the document was mistranslated," Clara said to Richard, her voice neutral. "If left as is, it undermines the agreement entirely." Richard's polite mask faltered. "And you can correct this? I can clarify it in a way that matches both parties' intent, without rewriting the deal." She turned back to the executives, speaking fluidly in their language, explaining the original meaning of the clause, the context in which it had been drafted, and how the current English phrasing had drifted from that intent. Within minutes, the tension in the visitors' shoulders eased entirely. One of them smiled faintly, the first sign of genuine comfort since she'd walked in. When she finished, the lead executive looked at Richard. "We are satisfied. This agreement is fair." Richard didn't answer right away. His eyes shifted to Clara, not warmly, but with something new. Calculation. Respect he didn't want to admit. As the visitors signed the revised page, he leaned toward her slightly. "Well done," he said quietly, as if the words cost him something. Clara simply nodded and stepped back, letting the room absorb the outcome. She didn't need his approval. The signed papers spoke for themselves. In the reflection of the glass wall, she caught a glimpse of herself standing behind the seated power players. Not in the frame they'd expected, but exactly where she needed to be. The conference room had emptied. Papers were signed, hands shaken, and the hum of high-stakes tension had drained from the air. Richard Hale had slipped out without another word, though Clara suspected he'd replay the scene more than once in his head. She lingered for a moment, stacking stray water glasses onto a tray. Through the glass walls, she could see the junior staff gathering near the far corner of the hallway. Receptionists, bellhops, even the housekeeping supervisor. They weren't pretending to be busy. They were waiting. When she stepped into the corridor, a few of them straightened. Elliot was there too, leaning casually against the wall. He gave her that almost smile of his. One of the receptionists, a young man named Daniel, spoke first. "What was all that about? I mean, you just walked in there and—" He stopped, searching for words. "Changed the whole room." Clara balanced the tray against her hip. "It wasn't about walking in," she said. "It was about being ready when someone finally opened the door." A murmur ran through the small crowd. She set the tray down on a side table. "People think preparation starts when you're asked to step up. It doesn't. It starts way before anyone's watching. Sometimes years before. Sometimes when no one thinks you'll ever get the chance. Like when you were still working laundry," one of the housekeeping staff asked. She nodded. "Or before that. You don't wait to be valued to start learning what you might need later." The bellhop, who'd once avoided her eyes, spoke quietly. "So you didn't even know if this skill would ever be useful here?" "No," she said. "But I knew it was worth having. And when the moment came, I didn't have to get ready. I was ready." Silence hung for a beat. Not the awkward kind, but the kind where everyone is measuring the words against their own lives. Elliot finally broke it. "Most people never see those moments coming. You just did." Clara shook her head. "I didn't see it coming either. I just refused to be caught unprepared." The group began to drift back to their stations, slower than usual. Daniel lingered, then said softly, "Guess I'll start those night courses after all." Clara gave him a small nod. Nothing grand, just enough to let him know she'd heard him. When the hallway cleared, she picked up the tray again and walked toward the service elevator. The marble floors still gleamed, The air smelled faintly of polished wood and citrus cleaner, and her steps were quiet. The deal was done. The lesson, she hoped, had just begun. The day's noise had finally faded into the soft hum of night. Guests were in their rooms, the lobby lights dimmed to a warm glow, and the last murmurs from the bar had quieted. Clara slipped through the service corridor toward the laundry room. She'd left something there that morning, not out of carelessness, but habit. The space was silent now, the stainless steel folding tables gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Against the far wall, on a narrow shelf above the detergent bins, sat the small tin box her mother had given her when she was 7. The lid was scratched, the paint faded, but the hinge still worked. She opened it slowly. Inside lay a single folded photograph, her and her mother, years ago, in front of a rented apartment with peeling paint. Her mother's arm was around her shoulders, and in the child's hands was a worn beginner's workbook in Mandarin, bought secondhand from a thrift store. Back then, no one had thought it would lead anywhere. Certainly not to conference rooms lined with glass and gold trim. Clara traced the edge of the photo with her thumb. She could still remember the sound of her mother's voice in the evenings, coaxing her through each word, neither of them sure why they kept at it except for the quiet certainty that learning mattered. Today, that certainty had walked her into a room where most people didn't believe she belonged, and walked her back out with the air shifted in her wake. She slid the photograph back into the tin, closed the lid, and held it in both hands for a moment. Through the thin laundry room wall, she could hear faint sounds from the street outside, the distant hum of a car, the muffled laughter of late-night pedestrians. Life going on, unaware of what had happened in the glass room upstairs. And that was fine. Greatness didn't always need an audience. She set the tin back on the shelf, exactly where it had been. Some things didn't need to be carried in pockets to be carried in full. When she stepped out into the hallway, the air was cool and still. The service elevator doors opened with a quiet chime. She pressed the button for the ground floor, her reflection faint in the brushed metal panel. Tomorrow she'd return to work. She would still walk the same halls, still wear the same uniform. But if the day came when someone opened another door, she would be ready. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing the quiet.